Hi everybody, this is Adam Hops from the National Operations Center of Excellence. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar about enhancing TSMO capabilities and resilience to address long-term weather and climate trends. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Your phones will be muted throughout. We want to keep the background noise to a minimum. But please feel free to ask questions along the way using that pod that's right there next to the presentation. We'll address those questions as we go along, and then also a few more at the end. But you have plenty of time for questions, so don't be shy. Anything that you're thinking of, feel free to share in there. All of our webinars are recorded, and the slides are made available afterwards. So we'll have those released here probably on Monday. Take a look at our YouTube channel for the recording, as well as our website and Knowledge Center, which will have the slides and the recording as well. So feel free to stay in touch and share with colleagues and let other folks know about this. And then lastly, all of NOCO's resources are in that top Knowledge Center link that are right there up there. There's a few on this topic. However, we're looking forward to putting this webinar up there and starting to build our resources around this area as well. So thanks for participating, and if you have any ideas on this topic for NOCO resources, be sure to let me know. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Pisano of FHWA. Paul's the team leader of the Road, Weather, and Work Zone Management team at FHWA. He organized this webinar and is a leader in this topic, and we want to thank him for bringing this conversation to NOCO. And Paul, I'll go ahead and unmute you and turn it over to you.
Gauges.
Hi, Paul.
Okay, hello. Good day, everybody. This is Paul Pisano, and thank you, Adam, for that introduction. We also like to thank you and the National Operations Center of Excellence for hosting today's webinar. We appreciate all of you who are participating and hope you find today's webinar engaging and want to explore the topic further. So we'll be talking about that intersection of TSMO, Transportation System Management and Operations, resilience, and specifically with respect to extreme weather and climate. So what does that all mean? Hopefully you'll have a better sense of what that all means after this webinar. So again, I am going to be going through a couple of opening slides to provide some context, but we'll turn it over to Doug Pape and Hunter McCracken from Battelle, who will dive into the topic in much greater depth. Let me just go ahead and introduce Doug and Hunter at this time, and so when they get going, you'll have a sense of who they are. Doug Pape is a senior research engineer at Battelle in Columbus, Ohio. He's worked in transportation safety from the perspective of the highway, the driver, and the vehicle. He has led projects for the Federal Highway Administration for automated and conventional vehicles. During his 35-year career with Battelle, he has conducted experiments on highways, test tracks, and in computer simulations. He has a bachelor's degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a master's degree from the Ohio State University, both in mechanical engineering, and he's a registered professional engineer. Hunter McCracken is a transportation operations researcher at Battelle in Arlington, Virginia. Mr. McCracken provides ongoing support to the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Operations in Transportation Engineering Research and Analysis. Hunter has extensive experience with the Capability Maturity Framework, including the development of the framework and the execution of both traffic management and work zone management Capability Maturity Framework workshops. Mr. McCracken holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Tennessee Tech University and a master's degree in transportation engineering from the University of Tennessee. So the topics today for this webinar, first I will provide an overview of FHWA resilience initiatives, again to provide some context of how we got to where we are today. And then I will turn it over to Hunter and Doug to provide an introduction to the Capability Maturity Frameworks, which will, throughout today's webinar, will be referred to as CMFs, which I'm imagining most of you are familiar with that, but also recognize that we are talking about the frameworks and not crash modification factors. We'll also talk about extreme weather and operations, and then look at how we overlay this whole concept of climate and extreme weather onto the CMFs, and then I'll close with a summary about an upcoming report from Federal Highway Administration. So first of all, just again, quick overview about FHWA resilience initiatives with regards to, particularly with regards to highway operations and maintenance. First, on the one hand, you have the Road Weather Management Program that within the Federal Highways Office of Operations, we have this program. I'm the team leader, and I have two other folks working for me, Romer Alfalor and Gabe Guevara, uh, and along with other support from folks like Ray Murphy in our Resource Center. We're doing a lot of work to develop and help deploy solutions and strategies that enable agencies to better manage road systems and minimize the impacts of adverse weather conditions. These solutions and strategies focus on all types of weather, so it's not just a winter weather thing. It's winter, it's weather, snow, ice, it's flooding, rain, wind, dust, fog, all of that obviously have impacts to the transportation system, and our job is to figure out how to help those who are responsible for operating the system better manage it under those conditions. And we look at all the full breadth of severity from light events to extreme events. And what's important to recognize here is that with a changing climate comes an increase in these extreme events. So while we tend to focus on strategies that that enable an agency to deal with what's happening on the road today or right now or in the next 24 hours from now or 36 hours and what needs to happen in the near term, we also need to recognize that there are changes that are occurring in the long term that we need to be thinking about and preparing for. So that's really where this project is coming from, is what's coming down the road, and if it is, in fact, as we've seen already, an increase in extreme weather events, then we need to think about that and what the strategies and solutions need to look like as we have more extreme events. The five stars there just highlight some of the solutions that have come out of the program, particularly in regards to weather responsive traffic management strategies, Pathfinder, which is all about consistent messaging for the traveling public. That we're doing work to look at how weather needs to play a part in the whole connected and automated vehicle world with things like Pike Alert, which is software to translate observations from vehicles into useful information, and the integrating mobile observations work. We're the developers of the prototype of the maintenance decision support system, or at least we funded that. We didn't develop it. We funded others to do that. And then we have the integrated modeling for road condition prediction activities. So that's the road weather world and what we're doing on the road weather side. That gets complemented with another team within the Office of Operations, and that's the Organizing and Planning for Operations team. And that program works to make transportation systems management and operations, TSMO, a central part of an agency's mission and institutional structure. Many of you, I'm sure, know Tracy Scriba, who is the team leader, and other folks who work on her team like Jim Hunt and Joe Gregory, who have been instrumental in developing the capability maturity frameworks, among others. So that program, in coordination with AASHTO under the Sharp 2 umbrella, led the development of 6 capability maturity frameworks that focus on improvement actions for specific TSMO program areas. And the six frameworks are listed here: road weather management, planned special events, traffic incident management, traffic signal management, and work zone management. So, and this project, and what you're going to be hearing about, looks at the overlap of these two programs. So we think about whether, of course, there is the whole Road Weather Management CMS, which is all about, again, how do we manage what's happening today. But we also need to recognize that these long-term trends and these increase in extreme weather events also have an influence on these 5 other areas. And the whole idea here is, what are those impacts? How do we incorporate dealing with those impacts and planning for those impacts within each of these areas as listed? So that's what we're going to be getting into. Then also, in addition to what's going on in the Office of Operations, and our focus on resilience is from the operations and maintenance end of the transportation life cycle. There's a lot of other work going on within Federal Highway Administration, in particular the Office of Environment Planning and Realty, or Planning, Environment, and Realty. They've got a whole web page on resilience and a lot of other resources and information and tools listed there. So if you're looking for information about resilience overall, I would certainly encourage you to check out that website. In terms of work to date that we've done within the Office of Operations in regards to adaptation, and which has, looking at, when I think of adaptation as the resilience to extreme weather and climate change. So I think of those as the same thing in many respects. We've published a couple of reports. The first, they're Planning for System Management and Operations as part of Climate Change Adaptation, came out in 2013. And then I want to say 2 years ago, we published another report, the Climate Change Adaptation Guide for Transportation System Management, Operations, and Maintenance, as shown there. And then with that, we also published 2 flyers, an executive level 2-page flyer and a more technical level 4-page flyer about that topic and the material that's found in that report. So this work that's going on right now by Battelle is building upon this body of work and taking it to the next level. So with that, I would now like to turn it over to Hunter and to tell us about provide an introduction to capability maturity frameworks. Hunter.
Very good, and thank you, Paul. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. Before we get into kind of the meat of the new content that we've developed under this task order, since we are going to be talking about the capability maturity frameworks quite a bit, we wanted to give a brief introduction and background to those CMFs. Since this is a NOCO audience, we assume that most of you are at least somewhat familiar with the CMFs and that process, if not having undertaken one of the CMF workshops yourself at your own agency. But want to make sure everybody's on a level playing field there as we go through the rest of the webinar. So to give a brief background of the operations CMFs, they were really born from the capability maturity model, or the CMM. The capability maturity model concept is actually originally from the software development world. It was first adopted into highway operations by the SHARP 2 LO6 study. This study examined the way that agencies should be organized to successfully execute operations programs to improve travel time reliability. So that kind of goes back to that organizing for operations program that Paul spoke about just a second ago. Under the study, they developed a capability maturity model, like I said, that was geared towards highway operations and in turn travel time reliability. After that study was complete, AASHTO led the development of the web-based tool. So it took the CMM that was developed under the LO6 study and created this web-based tool that was very user-friendly. It could be updatable. It was easy to access, so everyone could go on there and use it whenever they liked. After that, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, FHWA led the development of the 6 operations CMFs, the capability maturity frameworks. Paul went over what those 6 CMFs were, but it took that capability maturity model and really distilled it down into these 6 different TSMO program areas to get more into the details of the specifics involved with those. So what is the CMF? What is the CMF process? It's really a 3-step process that I think is best illustrated by this figure here. Step 1 of this process is an agency-wide self-assessment. So it's looking in your agency and it's evaluating your capabilities across these 6 different process improvement areas or dimensions that you see at the left of the screen. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about those later. But each of those dimensions has a set of questions that you look at. You rate yourself from a level of 1 to a level of 4, as you see there across the top. And you return with a composite score in each of those dimensions. So for instance, under business processes, you may be a level 4. Under workforce, you may be a level 2, and somewhere in there you're a level 3, so they can be all across the board. Once you kind of have a baseline there, you know where your agency is in all of these dimensions, you can start to figure out where you want to go. So if under business processes you're at a level 3, but under workforce you're at a level 1, you may say, okay, we're good at being at a level 3 in business processes, but we really need to bump up that score for workforce. And so you're at a level 1, you want to get to a level 3, and so the tool then suggests different actions that will help you get your capabilities up from that level 1 to the level 3. And like I said, that's all illustrated in there. If any of that's confusing right now, we'll get into more of the details a little bit later, but this is, like I said, a good illustration of how the process works. So what is the purpose of the CMS? It's really intended to improve your TSMO capabilities. That's really what it's looking at. It's the self-assessment is gauging how capable you are across these 6 different dimensions and within these 6 different program areas. It does provide a structured approach, as was shown in the table. That's kind of that structured approach, and a user-friendly tool so that an agency can evaluate their operations programs. It provides agencies with a starting point for identifying your priority areas. Like I said, in some of those dimensions you may be rated pretty high, and some of them you may be rated pretty low. And so it's a good indication that you need to start with some of your lower level dimensions there. Those are the things you need to target first. That's the low-hanging fruit. Let's focus on that. It also facilitates a continual improvement process. You'll hear it said a lot, it's never intended to just take this assessment one time and then be done with it. The intent here is to take the assessment, identify actions, execute those actions, and then come back to the self-assessment and evaluate how much you've improved. Really, like I said, to facilitate a continual improvement process. So the outcomes of the CMS, it does jumpstart the improvement process. It looks at your immediate weaknesses, it gives you something to focus on, and it actually provides tangible actions that the agency can undertake to improve your capabilities. It also provides justification for actions, and we've seen this a lot across the country as we've done this workshop. The fact that you undertake a structured approach and you go about it very systematically, you can use that and you can take those results to upper management, and it can really help you tell your story and try to get some leadership support for those actions that you've chosen, and demonstrate that you're not at a very high level of capability and you really need some resources to get those capabilities up. It also improves consistency. Like I said, there is that structured approach. You can do it year after year if you want to. You can do it across the agency if you would like to. So it's very consistent in how you're addressing those capability improvements. And collaboration. That's one thing we've seen a lot in these workshops as well. Is one thing this does help with is getting everybody in the same room. Maybe a very disparate group of people across the agency that never sit down and talk about these things together, but this helps to get them there, and it helps to get them talking together and sharing ideas, and can reveal a lot of things about the agency and your practices that you didn't previously know. And then this is, I think, clear from what I've said, the benefits. It does provide a very focused set of actions that you can undertake that will help the most to improve your capabilities. It is a bottom-up improvement in your capabilities, and it helps you to get the engagement of program-specific stakeholders and get all those stakeholders in the same room to discuss these things. So like I said, after the Sharp 2LO6 study and the work by AASHTO to develop the online tool, FHWA did lead the development of these 6 program area CMS that you see here and that Paul discussed briefly. The CMS were developed for each of these program areas, and then an accompanying online tool was also developed that you can find at that link there at the bottom of your screen. And I'll go into each of those here. We don't want to go in these too much, but just to give a little bit of background, and some of this will be quite clear. The road weather management CMS, it's going to ask questions like, do you have the type of road weather information you need through existing systems and technology? Is your existing systems and technology enough to do what you want to be able to do? Does coordination between maintenance, the TMC operators, and other management and operations unit work well? So you can see these questions are kind of broad, and they just get a discussion going and really make you stop to think about whether the things you're doing are working well for you, they're helping you to accomplish your long-term goals. You would use this road weather management CMS if you were looking, obviously, to do any type of road weather management deployment. Paul's leading or involved in the Weather Savvy Roads EDC4 effort right now. Maybe you're thinking about undertaking that or getting more involved in that. Or you just want to improve your agency's capabilities in road weather management. Plan special events, asking questions like, have the appropriate partners been included in the event? How does your agency train and keep capable staff, including those at the TMC, to manage these events behind the scenes? So you can see that's something in the organization and workforce dimension, asking about your staff capabilities to properly mitigate the effects of planned special events on your transportation system. I think we recently completed one of these PSE CMS in Nebraska with the solar eclipse that we had not too long ago, and how they could manage the traffic impacts related to that. They could probably use it in Vegas tonight, as the Capitals undoubtedly win the Stanley Cup. So maybe, if you have a big planned special event like that, this is when you would want to undertake one of these PSE CMS. Traffic Incident Management CMS, are TIM needs collectively assessed, reviewed, and acted upon on a routine basis? In an error there. Do you have a formal TIM program that is supported by multidiscipline and multi-agency team or task force which meets regularly to discuss and plan for TIM activities? So these are just a couple examples of the questions and things that discussed in this CMF. Traffic management. How are traffic management capital improvement projects funded in your agency? How do you utilize your ITS regional architectures for traffic management related projects? So a lot of different stuff to consider here. And like I said, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of these because I think they're fairly obvious. And then finally, or not finally, we got two more to go. The Work Zone Management CMF asks questions about how well does your agency coordinate between multiple projects in a corridor. That's something like the Project Coordination Initiative under the Smarter Work Zones Initiative. And then how does your agency quantify work zone performance? That obviously relates back to the performance measurement dimension within the CMFs. You would use this framework, similar to the Weather Savvy Roads if you were wanting to get more involved in smarter work zones, or if you're having trouble with your work zone process reviews. It's a very similar approach to undertaking those work zone process reviews. And the Traffic Signal Management CMF, asking questions like, do you have a sustained budget for traffic signal operations and upgrades? And do you have performance measures to help make the case for those involvements? You would use this framework if you're considering updating your traffic signal management program, or you're considering major updates to your signal system. So we've talked about these dimensions a little bit, these 6 dimensions here: business processes, systems and technology, performance measurement, organization and workforce, culture, and collaboration. These 6 dimensions are the same across all of the CMFs, and each of these dimensions will have specific targeted questions under it. But just to go into a little bit more detail about what these dimensions are, in business processes, you're going to be looking at formal scoping, planning, programming, and budgeting. For instance, under road weather management, it may ask a question like, how are the agency road weather management activities funded and used? Under systems and technology, that one's a bit more tangible. It's how well you're using a systems engineering process, asking questions like, is the existing technology that you have working well? How good are you at integrating new technology and evaluating that new technology? For performance measurement, that's looking at measures definitions, data acquisition and utilization, asking questions like, do you have performance measures? Are you able to track how good of a job you're doing at mitigating the effects of work zones, for instance? And if you do have performance measures, are they actually being used? Culture, that's a pretty broad one. It talks about the technical understanding of these issues within your agency, leadership buy-in, program legal authority, things like that. Really focusing on, are you getting the buy-in from your leaders? Are these topics viewed as important within your agency? And what is the understanding of these things across the agency? Are they viewed as important? Under organization and workforce, you're looking at programmatic status, organizational structure, staff development, so professional capacity building. Are lessons learned being shared across the agency? Do you have succession planning in place? Things like that. And then finally, collaboration. What are your relationships with public safety agencies? These could be external agencies. These could be other departments within your own agency, local governments, MPOs, things like that. Backwards, sorry about that. And the contents of the frameworks, we just talked about those dimensions. Each of the dimensions will have these subdimensions. For instance, if you're looking at collaboration and work zone management, subdimensions could focus on law enforcement, collaboration with the private sector, collaboration with the public sector, things like that. And each of those subdimensions will contain a specific self-assessment question that you will answer, and you will judge yourself on a level of 1 to level 4 in capabilities that you can see across there. And then to move from each level of capability there, it does suggest action items that are targeted to that particular dimension and that particular subdimension. Not to go into too much detail about the levels of capabilities, but level 1 to level 4, with level 1 being ad hoc, things aren't very systematically applied across the agency, very ad hoc. It's self-describing right there. Level 2, these things are they're recognized, but they're probably not systematically applied across the agency. Level 3, things are mainstreamed. They're pretty well integrated. There's policies and procedures to predict, plan for, and manage the impacts of whatever program area that we're talking about. And then finally, the most optimized or advanced level of capability is at level 4 of optimized, that the policies and procedures that you have are systematically applied across the agency, and they're continually evaluated. You're looking at those and you're judging how well are they working, do they need any improvement, and you're making those improvements if need be. And then we've described this before. You have the 4 levels of capability there, and then there are the actions to advance you through those, depending on which level you're at and which level you would like to be. So with that, I will turn it over to Doug, who's going to talk about extreme weather and operations.
Thank you, Hunter. This is Doug Pape. The webinar began with Paul Pisano talking about 2 of the offices within the Federal Highway Administration. One of the activities under his purview is road weather management, and then he talked about the Office of Operations and how they have to work together. Then Hunter talked about, just finished talking about the capability maturity frameworks, which can be broadly applicable to lots of things that the Transportation Department would do. Leading in towards, here I come at the middle of the webinar, and I'm going to talk about how extreme weather, changes in what we expect the weather patterns to be, are going to influence transportation operations. And then Hunter will come back and he'll talk about some, an overlay, some additions to the capability maturity frameworks that are specifically for extreme weather that we're expecting. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of how extreme weather can affect operations. And these examples will be coming mostly from that first report that Paul talked about on his slide. So it's something that the Federal Highway Administration produced about 5 years ago. So one possible effect of extreme weather is going to be the increase in the number of very hot days. And that could lead to pavement softening and buckling. And that will have effects on operations. When drivers see the bumps, they'll slow down. That reduces your capacity. You might have to impose truck restrictions. And of course, you'll have all the repairs with the workload management and all that goes along with that there. Now, don't think that this is just an example, a hypothetical that somebody made up. Wisconsin, we're usually thinking about snow in Wisconsin, right? Well, in 2012, they had an unusually hot winter, and they were getting 30 to 40 incidents a day of buckling on their roadways. That was a lot of money and a lot of repairs they had to go through. Something more expected would be a rising sea level, which of course causes flooding and low-level operations and erosion. Well, obviously you have to close roads, but if you're good, you'll see that there is an extra high tide coming in, and then you will put up the signs for the detour and close the road before it floods so nobody gets trapped. Here in Ohio, where I live, we don't have a sea level rise, but we can have intense rain coming more frequently. Well, that can cause more crashes due to the poor visibility. And again, we can have flooding, especially in southern Ohio in the springtime when the snow melts. And then if the streams are carrying more water, there's erosion and scouring. So you've got incident management and more maintenance and all of that. So Paul alluded to briefly that extreme weather is kind of a synonym or a euphemism, if you will, for climate change. And climate change, well, that's just the same as global warming, right? It's not quite that simple. There are going to be different effects in different regions. You can see the two maps of Maryland there, and one of them has dots for areas that had an unusually dry year in 2007. Then the other map has dots that had an unusually wet year 3 years later. So there could be more of any extreme, hotter, colder, drier, wetter. The map of Michigan there shows which counties are going to have more snow in future years according to predictions. And again, this report from the Federal Highway Administration 5 years ago has some examples, different regions, what things you might expect, and some of the recommendations Hunter's going to have is that you might want to look up a climatologist or a hydrologist and get some real specific advice. What can you expect? So Paul mentioned this concept of resilience, and the FHWA has a definition for that, the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions, and then to withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. And of course, the changing conditions we're talking about are extreme weather or changes in the worldwide climate. So what's the link of resilience to what we've been talking about? Well, these are three pictures that Paul likes to show to answer that question. So the picture on the top, of course, is complete failure. There was a washout, the road's gone, or maybe you're in Hawaii and some lava came over the pavement and you can't drive. The picture in the middle is a temporary failure. The water came up, you couldn't drive for a few days, but then the water went by, it cleaned off the pavement, you're back in business. The picture on the bottom is reduced capacity. How many of you take a freeway home at night and if the weather's fine, everything's wonderful. But then, on a rainy day, everybody slows down, the freeway turns into a parking lot, level of service E. Well, there's a cost to that, and over the several rainstorms you have during the year, all those costs add up. So even if everybody just slows down a little bit, there's a cost to that, and it's a good idea to be resilient even to those everyday rainstorms. So if you're in a position where your response to an everyday rainstorm is, oh, no, never mind, business as usual, that's good. You're resilient to regular rainstorms, which means you're certainly on a step towards being resilient to the more extreme weather looking in the future. So now I'll toss this back over to Hunter, and he'll talk about some of the extreme weather overlays for the capability maturity frameworks.
Okay, thank you, Doug. And like Doug said, making a bit of a pivot here back to the CMS. When we started this study, we were looking at how an agency could potentially use the existing CMFs and what overlay we could apply to really get people thinking about, the things that Doug just talked about. How are you gonna adapt to these changing conditions? And in thinking about this, the existing questions that are within the existing CMS all assume your capabilities related to current conditions. So, you receive a lot of snowfall right now, you know how you're going to be able to mitigate the effects of planned special events or work zones under those current conditions. But what we really wanted to do in the intent of this climate or extreme weather overlay, I should say, is to get you thinking about how things are going to be changing and not just your capabilities in addressing current weather impacts, but as this climate is evolving, what things you're going to need to do, how is your agency going to need to adapt. And so we're going to step through each of these and first give a couple examples in here as they relate to the CMS and some of the work that we have done. So how does your agency need to adapt in business processes? And we talked about what the business process dimension was a little bit earlier. But thinking about stuff like, okay, you're thinking about planning and scoping and budgeting, well, you're going to need to start planning for resilience as well. You're going to need to start planning for new weather conditions that your region has never experienced, or more extreme weather conditions, or more frequent extreme weather conditions. So starting to think about that. Consider climate when estimating benefits. If you're thinking about new investments, think about, okay, well, we're evaluating those under current conditions, but if we look at long-term climate trends, how does that affect that decision that we're going to make? Like I said, things like allocating funding, and it's really all about understanding what's coming and proactively working to do something about it. So the first example here under business processes is in the road weather management CMS. One of the questions, I think this may be the first question in that CMS, is what is the current level of capability to influence and control traffic and travel behavior on facilities in the area? And like I said, we step through each of these levels, and you're going to identify as an agency which one of these you most closely align with. Can you just use static signs? If there's a road closure, do you just throw a sign out and that's the best you can do? And you can see those capabilities continue to advance you can set variable speed limits as needed, all the way up to you have automated weather responsive traffic control. So you would rate yourself across all those dimensions, looking at your current conditions and your ability to mitigate these road weather management impacts. But those are looking at current conditions, and what we want to do is we want to apply this extreme weather overlay and change the way that you look at this question, keeping in mind that these events are becoming more extreme, or extreme events are becoming more frequent, or you're experiencing weather that you've potentially never experienced before. So the first one here, the first extreme weather overlay, could be the weather responsive plans that you have are reviewed periodically to reflect increases in extreme weather severity or are adaptable to accommodate above average extreme conditions. So, looking at this, you don't just have plans in place to respond to the weather conditions that you currently have, but you know what weather conditions are coming, and you have modified your plans to be able to respond to those as well. A second one, and this one's, some of these are not as immediately obvious. You might think, well, how does this climate change affect work zone management? And one of the questions under the business processes dimension in work zone management is how does your agency develop, implement, and evaluate transportation management plans, or TMPs? And you can see here through the levels, superficially, you just kind of do it to check the box. It's a requirement and you get it done, but it's not really that useful. All the way up to it's applied to every project. They're very useful, and you're evaluating how the TMP developed worked, whether it needs to be changed in the future, and you kind of created a feedback loop there of continual improvement. And so thinking about an extreme weather overlay, you could say that the agency's TMPs and TMP development process has been altered to reflect changing weather and weather-related impacts to construction and traffic. In your TMP, you might have a plan for you have a work zone. You're closing a lane, but you've never really had. You're in North Florida, South Georgia, and you've never really had to think about snow before. But in the future, maybe that region is going to be getting more snow. So you've updated your TMPs, you updated your TMP projects to say, here's how we're going to deal with traffic. Here's how we're going to manage those impacts in extreme weather conditions that you've never experienced before. Under the traffic management CMS and business processes, we look at how traffic management planning is performed by your agency. And an extreme overlay for something like this would be traffic management planning is based on vulnerability assessments that take extreme weather events into account. So you've looked at which corridors are most vulnerable to something like flooding. If you get like Doug said, a rainfall event of very high magnitude, proactively which corridor is going to be most impacted by that event, and you've established plans to deal with that in advance. And it's not just under current conditions, which corridors are most vulnerable to that flooding, but as climate changes and as these extreme weather events happen more frequently, you've reevaluated that, and it's a continual improvement cycle there that moving forward, these corridors will be impacted, and those plans have been adjusted to reflect that. So moving on to systems and technology, that business process one is pretty broad and can sometimes be a little difficult to understand and see how this would all fit in. Systems and technology is a bit more tangible. How does your agency need to adapt in systems and technology? Well, if you're getting more extreme weather, or extreme weather is happening more frequently, you're going to need to build or reinforce your systems and technologies that you have deployed to withstand that extreme weather. If you're testing the equipment that you put in the field before you do it, you're going to want to update your testing procedures to not just reflect the weather that you currently get, but the weather you will be getting. Know where your snowplows are. Maybe you previously had one snowplow, but the way things are moving, you're going to get a lot more snowfall, and now you have 20 snowplows. So you're thinking about, okay, well, you're going to start knowing where your snowplows are. And you can look at, like I said, under the Weather Savvy Roads, the IMO, and starting to think about those things and those technologies. Following developments in connected vehicles and knowing how those can help you mitigate the impacts of extreme weather. So an example question here under traffic signal systems, and we talk about this one quite a bit. What type of system capabilities does your agency have to maintain continuity of service and reliable operations? Level one there, you repair things when they're caught. It's broke, we go out and fix it. All the way up to your corridors are kept in good repair. Work orders are tracked electronically. Operations, maintenance, timing, and performance are all linked. Things run very smoothly. But then when we start to think about extreme weather, you can think, can your existing malfunction detection systems that you would have in place if you were at that advanced level of capability, can they detect those malfunctions that would be due to extreme weather? And do you have plans in place to continue service and reestablish service if your system is disrupted by extreme weather? Do you have plans for those repairs if you're receiving a high snowfall event that you may never have received in the past? One thing that we'll talk about a little bit later too is your traffic cabinet resilience. You can evaluate, okay, well, we know these cabinets are in floodplains, so let's proactively raise them up so that they won't be disrupted, they won't be knocked out if we get a flood in a particular region. And like I said, that's not just looking at the rainfall you get currently, but that's working with a climatologist to know that, okay, rainfall events are going to be increasing, your floodplains are going to change, and you're going to need to reevaluate which of these cabinets need to be reinforced to improve the resiliency of your system. Performance measurement. This is looking at things about can you measure performance during extreme weather events? Do you have any performance measures that tell you about uptime and downtime during extreme weather? Do you have any way to track yourself and to see how good of a job you're doing at mitigating the impacts of extreme weather? You look backward at trends in your own data and you see what you've done well and what you've not done well and where you can improve, and you proactively make those changes before it continues to happen. And then also looking forward to climate predictions. We've talked about that a lot. It's not just where we are, but it's knowing what's coming and getting ready for it. Again, a traffic signal system, and I think we have two of these in this dimension actually. One of the questions is, to what extent has your agency defined how performance will be measured and compared to agency goals and objectives? And you can see the different levels here, from only special studies all the way up to there's an ongoing assessment of defined measures. And this goes back to what I said. The extreme weather overlay would be you would have those very typical common performance measures for your traffic signal system, but now you create a new one and you want to know how you're performing during extreme weather events. You're tracking those and you're able to do something with that information. Another traffic signal system question is, how does your agency utilize performance measures to identify and quantify the need for operational performance? Extreme weather overlay here would be the agency is able to determine downtime that can be attributed to extreme weather events and target these most vulnerable systems for resiliency upgrades. And that's consistent with what we've discussed this entire time, is what systems continually get knocked out by extreme weather. You can do something with that measure. You can go and proactively reinforce that particular system so that it's not continually knocked out in the future. So moving on to culture, this is a pretty abstract one here. Is how does your agency need to adapt in culture when we're thinking about extreme weather? does your agency acknowledge these future trends? Do they understand what's going to be happening? Have they asked the right questions to figure out what is going to be happening? And if so, are they proactively preparing for those things? One thing is many agencies are change adverse, like this is the way we've always been doing it, this is the weather we've always seen, we don't really want to make those changes. And it's modifying the agency's culture where you're no longer change adverse, but you're risk adverse. Even more afraid of change or more of the public feedback that you're going to get whenever something goes down during an extreme weather event, and you proactively work to mitigate that before it happens. An example of culture here under the Traffic Management CMS, what response best describes the perception of traffic management in your agency? It's a core program. They know it's something that we need to do, but there's just a few champions, and they're kind of responsible for ushering it through the agency, all the way up to you're getting full agency buy-in, you're reporting up, or full leadership buy-in, excuse me. You're reporting up to leadership about how well you're doing, some of those performance measures, and all agency staff members embrace that importance. So an extreme weather overlay for that question would be that there's ongoing discussions about resilience and extreme weather when it comes to traffic management. So these are things that you're already talking about. You're not just ignoring it and pretending like nothing's coming. You're acknowledging that it's there. The agency culture allows these things to be discussed, and you're proactively doing something about it. Traffic management is integrated with emergency management operations and incident management during extreme weather events. So you've got that collaboration, and that's going to spill over to that collaboration dimension. But you're collaborating, you're working together. The culture allows you to do these things before the full effects of these extreme weather events are fully realized. Another one within work zone management, how is work zone management valued within the agency? At the very low level, it's uneven. One district does it very well. They mitigate the impacts of work zone management very well, while another district maybe doesn't do such a great job. All the way up to there's systematic processes in place that spread the importance of work zone management, not just in operations, but in planning and in design across the whole agency. So it's something that's understood as being as valuable and very important across the agency, and that's coming down. That's a top-down approach coming from leadership, stressing the importance of this. So extreme weather overlay. Upper management is actively encouraging conversations between planners, climatologists, operations design, and everybody that's talking about these changes that are coming and what impacts that could potentially have on the transportation system and how it can affect work zone management. So like I said, like the previous one, the culture allows you to discuss these things beforehand. That discussion is encouraged. It's across the whole agency. And you're thinking about how those impacts are going to affect work zone management when that's not very obvious. When we were going through this, this was a challenging dimension of, how does extreme weather, how is climate change going to affect work zone management? But these are things you need to start thinking about. And in the report that we've laid out, we identified a lot of issues that weren't immediate obvious, but your agency needs to be discussing those things. Organization and workforce, this goes back to resiliency involving all levels of the organization. We've talked about that in culture. These kind of go hand in hand. These issues just aren't siloed in the particular region that you would have think. They're kind of spread across the whole agency. There's adequate staffing resources. Those have been made available to address the impacts of future climate trends. So you don't just have staff to deal with what you currently have, but you looked at what's coming and you know how to deal with those things before they get here. And then old timers to the newbies about the big one. That was one of Doug's favorites. The lessons learned are shared across the agency. That's not just dying where people retire and people leave the agency, but there's a systematic process in place to document these lessons learned and pass them down to new staff as they're brought on board. That goes back to the succession planning, lessons learned, and sharing that across your whole workforce. An example of this in the traffic signal systems one, again, what are your capabilities within your staff to assign qualified personnel to specific or specialized operational situations. At level 1, you're not really able to assign staffing resources just for traffic signal system management. At a very advanced level, you are able to dedicate staff resources to high priority corridors on a full-time basis, and that is their sole responsibility. So you have the staff that you need to focus on those high priority corridors and make sure they're running effectively and they're resilient. And the extreme weather overlay here, this one's a bit more obvious. You have the staff that you need to deal with those corridors, and that can be the responsibility in the face of these extreme weather events that are coming. It's not just that you have the staffing resources that you need to deal with current conditions, but that you have the staffing resources proactively in place before those future extreme weather events come your way. And under traffic management, what capabilities with respect to staffing are available to support traffic management? You know, at low level, you can monitor and respond to incidents. When they arise, you can deal with them, all the way up to you have decision support tools and automated control strategies in place. Your staff can actively manage those technologies, and you have the staffing in place that you need to support traffic management to its fullest extent. Extreme weather overlay here, a little bit different. You know, you don't just have the typical staff that you would need to deal with traffic management issues, but your agency has climate experts, meteorologists, and hydrologists on staff, and maybe not on staff, but you're actively consulting with those groups to predict these climate events before they happen. So you know they're coming, you're able to respond to them, you're able to put staffing and resources where you need before they get here, and you have those staffing resources in place to help you out, like I said, before the event happens, and we keep stressing that throughout. You've done all this beforehand, and you can proactively predict these things. So the final dimension here, collaboration. You know, we've talked about this one a lot already, and the first point there to really drive that home, this collaboration has to begin before the storm hits. So you don't just have an extreme weather event, you don't just have an emergency, and then you think about it. You've thought about these things beforehand. You're having these discussions within and outside of your agency before the events happen, and the agency culture really enables those discussions. And those 2-second points there are that. So collaboration within the Road Weather Management CMS, one of the questions within that CMS, what level of collaboration exists with the weather community and meteorologists? So that one's pretty obvious as being important to this discussion that we're having here. You know, at an advanced level of capability, you have in-house expertise for road weather forecasts. So, you know, you have meteorologists on staff that are able to predict weather conditions. You can respond to those, and you can position resources as needed beforehand to properly mitigate those impacts. So to further add on to that, and almost a next level of capability there, this extreme level overlay, you do not just with meteorologists, but you're periodically consulting with climatologists to predict long-term trends. So you're not just able to predict the weather that's going to happen in a couple days. You can't just predict the snowfall that's happening next week, but you know what's coming in the long term, and you start working with that, and you update the plans that you have in place. Your response plans for these weather events can be updated in advance after consulting with the climatologist to not just mitigate the impacts of the weather over the next 2 days, but over the weather of the next 2 years, maybe. And the next one, finally here, this collaboration, like I said, it's all about collaborating with other agencies within your state, whether it be you know, housing, health, or recovery equipment. And you're thinking about questions about if you have an extreme weather event, an emergency like this, who gets first dibs on light towers? What happens when your cellular communication jams? Those are questions that are being discussed, and you're talking across your agency before the things happen. And if you're in Florida, you may not have thought about snowfall very much in the past, and you're not just talking about things that happen frequently in your agency. Michigan gets a lot of snow. Of course, they're talking about these things, but maybe regions that don't get a lot of these things, they know the weather that's going to be coming. They know they're going to be getting more extreme and more frequently extreme events, and they're talking about those things beforehand. So that's within your agency, and then corresponding and talking with agencies in neighboring states. Does the alternate routes that you would need to establish, are those going to be crossing into other states? If you're in the Kansas City area, that's obviously going to be a big impact. Any region that straddles state lines like that. You've set up routes for evacuations. That's going to go through neighboring states as well. And there's been backup equipment and personnel allocated to deal with these emergencies. And the last point there in the box, you can't stress it enough, what we're talking about here is all the discussions that need to have before the need arises. If you're doing this properly, if you're very advanced, and your capabilities as high as it can be, you're having these discussions beforehand, and you're able to mitigate them whenever you actually experience them. You're proactive and not reactive. And with that, I am going to pass it back to Paul, I think, to talk about some of the upcoming items from FHWA.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Hunter and Doug. I think you guys did a great job giving depth to the topic as we laid out. So just we got some time for Q&A, but before we go to that, I just wanted to provide a couple of closing slides. First of all, just to highlight the what's coming out of this project. So we have a report that is in draft form that will be coming soon, we hope. Realistically, it'll probably be sometime late summer or early fall at best. That's going to capture everything that you heard here, plus a lot of other work. I mean, it gets into just this whole idea of what does resilience to extreme weather look like for TSMO overall. And it's the point being here, and if it hasn't come out through what you just heard, is that if you're thinking about extreme weather events and long-term trends and long-term changes, you need to take a risk-based approach to how to manage a system, even though there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of how this is all going to play out, but you still need to be methodical. You need to look at where your problems are, where your vulnerabilities are, what you need to be planning for, given the expectation that these events are going to be occurring more frequently. Well, that goes very much and it's very much in sync with and complementary to the same concepts that are behind the capability maturity frameworks, which is why it just seemed natural to us as we were exploring this work and doing the initial work here that's going to be captured in this report, that we said, hey, wait a second, this sounds a lot like the CMS. So that's why we added this additional work that you just heard about to say, okay, what would a weather resilience overlay to the CMS look like? And that's what these gentlemen just have been working on and have captured, what you've heard about here, and will be summarized in this coming report. So certainly hope that this has piqued your interest, and you'll be interested in seeing the report when it comes out and to utilize some of these tools and concepts. So the report will have cover a number of different things here. The other thing I also just want to make sure is clear that we certainly appreciate that resilience is much broader than just climate resilience or extreme weather resilience. There's a lot more to resilience than what we've talked about here, but our focus has just been on the weather aspect of it. And what will be interesting to see is as we explore the other aspects of resilience, cybersecurity, terrorist attacks, any other factors that we need to be resilient to, they may also have a part of what we think of when we think of the CMF. So that's certainly something for further exploration. So certainly, if you have any questions or want to ask for more information, you can contact me. I also list here Romer Alfalor's contact information. Romer is on my team and is going to be taking on a more active role in this work. With that, I think we've got about a half hour if we need to answer questions. And as Adam just posted there, please post the questions in the chat pod, and we'll answer them as best we can.
Thanks, Paul. It looks like there's a few folks writing in questions there. And just a reminder that for everything, all the great information that was discussed in the last hour, Romer put up a link to the TSMO frameworks there in the chat box, and we have the links up there above the presentation for many of the things that were mentioned. So be sure to check those out as well. Almost everything is available on the FHWA website up there. Give folks a few more minutes. People are starting to type things in.
Problem. And while we're waiting, actually one other quick question or comment before I get to Matthew's question. I should also have acknowledged the work that Lori Radow did on this project. She actually was leading this project before she went up and retired on us. So we picked it up and are completing it for her. But Lori has played a critical role in this whole concept of weather resilience and TSMO. So kudos to Lori for that. She now is doing work with the TRB folks in this area as well. Okay, so Matthew, is the flow chart of how CMFs are done shown in the slides available somewhere? I don't actually know that. Romer or is Jim Hunt? Jim Hunt is on the line. If either of you could weigh in, or Doug or Hunter, either of you,
I don't know that particular flow chart is available, but I would point you towards that website that Romer linked to. There's a ton of great resources on there. There's a lot of like flyers and fact sheets about the CMFs and a lot of good resources. So certainly check that out. And I think if Jim Hunt was unmuted, what he would probably say is we do have a lot of these workshops that we're delivering across the country right now, across all of the different program areas that we discussed, whether it's road weather or work zones or traffic management, anything like that. So if anybody on the call is interested in conducting one of those workshops, reach out to Jim or anybody on the call, and we can get you in touch with the right person for that as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Hunter. Really good point. I should have mentioned that as well. Yeah, we have a task order underway to conduct workshops, certainly in the road weather management, CMF, as well as in work zone management, which also ties to the process reviews, and we are happy to conduct those if anybody wants to take advantage of that. And those workshops right now have not introduced the weather resilience aspects yet, but certainly as our expectations, we will be building on that over next year or so. Yeah, okay, so Romer did say yes, the website contains info and flow charts on all the CMFs. Thank you, Romer.
It looks like there's another question coming in. I was wondering during this great presentation, I really love the overlay concepts that you did with all the CMFs. It seems like everything fit in into that framework pretty easily. Were there any CMF areas where the framework was a little bit more difficult or didn't quite make as much sense? It was tough to see as you were talking through it, but any areas where that framework was a little bit different with the weather overlay?
Well, I guess I'll provide my thoughts, and then certainly turn to Doug and Hunter if they want to add more. I mean, certainly one of the things is, and I think Hunter may have said this, is that there were plenty of aspects of the CMFs that don't really have a weather resilience climate issue. So part of that whole process was, okay, where does this really matter or not? And so, but there was really the biggest thing was, does this make does this even matter? Was probably the biggest question we were coming up against. But I can't think off the top of my head of any cases where we say, well, there's this really big weather resilience issue, and it's not captured anywhere in the CMS. I don't think we came across that. Again, I'll turn to Doug and Hunter. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that in response to Adam's question.
Yeah, this is Doug. You actually said it well. As we went through the existing CMFs, one question methodically at a time, we asked, is there a climate overlay or not? And if there wasn't, we just said so. In this report that's coming out, sometimes I'll say there's no climate overlay. And there wasn't really difficult to place something somewhere. So sometimes we wondered, well, should it go here, should it go here, should it go both places? Like the one about, like this next question coming up, the one about, well, where do we put consult a climatologist? That's in there lots of places. So I'll use that as a segue to Michael's question. How do you obtain a site or area-specific information relative to possible weather patterns? I'm going to put in the chat box here a link to one of the reports that Paul put just the cover up there. And this is the report that I was talking from. And it has in there references to prior reports that talk about, here's what to expect in Alaska, here's what to expect in the Northwest United States. So if you just want to read something quickly to get an idea, you can look at that report. Or you can go to the references in that report to dig a little deeper. If you really want to go up to level 4, talk to a climatologist. A lot of universities have a meteorology department. It turns out I'm personal friends with Ohio's state climatologist, and he's in the geology department. And some states already have the contracts in place. There are also private firms that provide that service. Yes, thank you, Paul. Every state has a state climatologist, but you may have to figure out which department they're in.
Right. Yeah, definitely. But I would, and I haven't. I'm sure some searching online, you'd be able to find the climatologists within your state, and that's where I would start, because they're certainly going to be looking at this for the whole state and the region. I mean, the biggest challenge that we faced over time as we've been looking at this whole topic is the climate models are by nature very expansive in their extents, and they cover a wide area. But there's been a lot of work doing what they call downscaling and trying to bring it down to a higher resolution. And there's a lot of work going on in that area, and I think that again, that would be you're going to get a much better sense of what they know when you speak with the climatologist in your state, to know how far they've come with the downscaling and the ideas of what's actually going to happen. Because that was what we were finding in some of our earlier work was, well, yeah, your precipitation is going to change. There's a chance it could be more, there's a chance it could be less. Okay, so what do I do with that information? Yeah, it doesn't help me in terms of figuring out what action I need to take for managing my system. But as they've gotten better with climate models, as they've done a better job with the downscaling, they're honing in on what those anticipated changes are, and they would be the people to talk to find out about that. Okay, so Michael's also asking, how about best practices with regard to coordination with NWS? Well, we certainly have a lot of work going on about coordination with NWS for real-time information. That's the whole Pathfinder initiative that I mentioned. And I would absolutely say yes. Talk to the meteorologist in charge at your local forecast office, and build a relationship up with them. They're going to be meteorologists and less so climatologists, so they may not be may not be a resource about what's happening on the longer time scales, but certainly having a good relationship with the folks who are in coordination, meteorologists and such, and in your local forecast office is just a good thing to do in general.
And there's a one of the questions in the Road Weather Management CMS is exactly that. What's your level of the climatologist, or what's your level of your meteorologist involvement? And level 1 is, we just listen to the weather report on the radio like everybody else. And then Romer brought up the point that several DOTs actually have an in-house meteorologist, and the one from Wyoming, I'm sorry, I forget her name, was in a webinar with us last year. But
Yes, she's since left Wyoming.
Oh, okay.
But they have some have meteorological staff in house, or have climate or contract services in house. Okay, Edward, are there smart sensor pilot which are demonstrating the ability to obtain traffic operations and weather-related roadway data? Through the again, under the Everyday Counts Weather Savvy Roads initiative, we're promoting what we call integrating mobile observations, which is all about putting sensors on vehicles to measure weather and road conditions to complement what many states have installed along the roadside to collect weather and road condition data. And so there's a number of companies out there who are developing and marketing these types of products. So we have resources available for what that means. We don't have a pilot program right now where we're providing funding to do that explicitly, but we do have some resources available to learn from others and do site visits and things like that to see some other places who've done that sort of work, which is again more road weather management than it is sort of the weather resilience, perhaps, although certainly that information would be useful broadly. Michael asks, do any DOTs have reserve staff or equipment that could be called for in an extreme snow event? We can only do so much with base pilots and operators. Most agencies are now working under very tight budgets, don't have the ability to have a large reserve, but I think some do. But what I've seen and heard more is not so much that they will build up their own reserve, but they will at least have agreements in place with neighboring jurisdictions or other districts and such, so that if you end up having an event in your district that maybe not such a wide-scale event that it affects others, then you can share resources, and that tends to be the way I've heard agencies tend to approach that problem when they're maxed out. So that's something I think certainly, and again that ties back to one of the, was it a business process that Hunter talked about, which is again having these agreements in place and be planning for these types of things, so that when it does happen, you're not starting from square one to say, oh wait, who else can we call? And you already know who to call, and you already got the agreements in place to share the resources. And also asked, are you aware of any states that have prioritized the clearance of critical roadways in cases of extreme snow in terms of getting funding for extra plows? I mean, certainly, again, states have their levels of service and their priority route. They do have their priority routes already defined in terms of which roads are going to be cleared first and such. I don't know how that might tie into an extreme event or not, though. To be frank, I don't know if Hunter or Doug, did you hear of anything along that line in your interviews or anything?
Nothing to add now.
Typing things in, so this is a good conversation. Billy, MassDOT has staff whose routine jobs are not operation but trained to assist in special snow events. Yeah, okay, call to serve in special snow events. Yeah, good point, Lily. Thank you. Good TSMO. Thank you, Caleb. Regions have flood-proofed their floodplain signal cabinets. Good question. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if we've even done any sort of assessment of that on a broad scale. But it would be good to identify, and maybe it's something we would follow up on some other case studies of some people who have done, some agencies who have done that sort of action. We could use that.
Yeah, and that's kind of an issue we had with a lot of these CMFs as we've done these workshops around the country. Is we want to point people towards specific examples of where agencies have undertaken these actions, but a lot of the more advanced actions, which these all would be, we don't really have a lot of examples, if any, of a state actually doing it. It's just like, this is what a state should do, So that's been a challenge throughout.
Other people typing, give them another couple minutes. Thank you, Romer. Right. So just highlighting some of the pilots we did with on the integrated mobile observations work with Minnesota, Michigan, and Nevada, and we're in the process of putting together a summary report that captures some of the major lessons learned out of that activity. Hopefully that'll be available next month or so.
I'm
It
interested.
was,
What has been helpful to us in past rainfall events is to know how to find the stream flow measuring devices online so we can track the peak flows and where they might hit and submerge a bridge. Yeah, and I know that the USGS has a lot of stream gauges and data available there. There's certainly also some new work coming out of NOAA on the National Water Model, which will which models then stream flows. And in fact, there's a project, an NCHRP project on Floodcast, which is developing this decision support tool on what flooding may occur as well, that I think would be, and how that would affect the roadway. So keep an eye out for that project and the work that's coming out of there. And again, I think conversations with others within your state, there's a lot of good information out there.
Yeah, to Michael's point, that right outside my office here in Columbus is the Olentangy River, and there's a water level gauge just 10 miles upstream, and the USGS is nice enough it even projects for the next 12 or 24 hours what the level is going to be.
Okay. Is that something they have? Actually, I should know this, but don't. A website that has sort of all the sensor gauges everywhere and then with the those types of predictive capabilities.
I think so. Let me see how fast I can find that link. Stupid.
as Doug looks for that link, just a quick reminder that this webinar was recorded, so we'll be able to share this most likely early next week, and you can share it with your colleagues. It's obviously been a really interesting and important topic that everybody within inside a TSMO agency should view. So we will let everybody know as soon as that recording is available. You'll get an email along with the slide deck.
Great, thank you, Adam. Okay, yeah, and Michael was just saying, yeah, projections are helpful. Maintenance forces have some knowledge of what stream elevations and lake elevations will threaten adjacent waterway. Again, and that gets back to that point that Doug made earlier, which is that there's a lot of knowledge within your own agency about where your problem areas are, and it's certainly important to capture that information and that knowledge so that as we're, of course, transitions, you don't lose that.
And this is Doug. I just put in a link to a river gauge that's about 5 miles downstream from Columbus here. It's at Frank Road, but that's just south of downtown Columbus. And if you click on the link, you can see we had a pretty good rain on Tuesday. And here we are at 2 o'clock on the 7th, and it's got river levels projected all the way out until Tuesday afternoon. So that's 4 days ahead of time. Looks like it's going to be pretty boring, but so from that one link here in Columbus, you can probably find something closer to home.
Right. And when one man's boring is another man's safe.
Yes,
So
yes.
We're good with that. That's okay.
Yeah, the folks at the City of Columbus are probably glad it's boring.
Yeah, right, right.
Michael, what state are you from? You're on the Mississippi. Where are you? Land of 10,000 lakes. Very good.
Yeah, right. And again, so yeah, a lot of great work going on the road weather side with Minnesota DOT in particular. So I'm sure you got a lot of great resources right there and available to you. Right.
Well, Paul and Doug and Hunter, I want to thank you for an outstanding webinar and resource that's been developed with this. This is fantastic, and we all look forward to the report that's going to be due out soon, and I'm sure it will be blasted out by your offices and available all over the place. So we are looking forward to that. Before we close it out, Paul, did you have any final thoughts?
Again, just to thank you, Adam, and to the National Operations Center of Excellence for hosting this, and we're really excited about this activity as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you again, Doug and Hunter and Paul, of course, for organizing this and delivering it today. And thank you for everybody that joined. Look out for that recording, and be sure to grab those links that are up there that were discussed. Those will continue to be great resources.